to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the projected cap space for the New York Giants in the 2021 season. And before I get started on the video, I just want to say there's no way of knowing now at this point in time with the way that things are going on in the world right now what the cap space will look like next year because, of course, the cap space it depends on the revenue from the previous season. That's why it goes up because the revenue always goes up in the NFL year in and year out. Well, this year, it's a little bit different. Obviously, with what's going on in the world, we don't know if the league's going to start on time. We don't know for sure if there's going to be a season. I think there will be a season, and I personally believe there will be a full 16-game season, but that doesn't mean that the revenue will be the same. Of course, there very well may be empty stadiums, and if there isn't, I don't think it'll be filled to capacity. Even if people have the freedom to go to the games, I think people, at least for the first half of the season, may be a little reluctant to be in a place with 80,000 people. So that should affect the revenue for the NFL unless they could find ways of getting it in another way, which I'm going to pull up some quotes in an article that came out of how it may or may not affect the salary cap for 2021. Now, the New York Giants, last I talked about this, had, I think, about $70 million in space, somewhere along those lines. But now, according to Sport Track, first, there's been a revision to their expected salary cap. I think it was initially $215. Now I'm seeing about $209, somewhere in that ballpark. Also, and again, this is all estimations. Also, when I last talked about the salary cap, they had front-loaded the contract for Blake Martinez, James Bradbury, along with a couple of other free agents. That has since changed. When they changed the structures of the contracts, they evened out the salaries. Matter of fact, the second year is actually more backloaded than the first year. So more of that goes towards the cap when we initially anticipated less. So the projected salary cap for 2021 is much lower than initially anticipated, at least as of now. Of course, you could always maneuver contracts around, and I'm going to get into videos of potential free agents that the New York Giants could look at, but I'm going to get into the exact figures and maybe talk about some things that the New York Giants could look to do to try to free up some cap space for the 2021 offseason, and then I'll, in a future video, I'll get into some free agents that I think they could potentially be looking at. Obviously, I would think we'd be looking at either the edge rusher position, maybe a wide receiver, somewhere along those lines, maybe a center if they haven't sewn that up this year. So let's jump into some of the quotes that I was able to pull up regarding next year's salary cap, not just for the New York Giants, but for the NFL and how what's going on in the world right now may affect the potential salary cap. Over the Cap's Jason Fitzgerald quotes a provision from the new CBA to indicate that the salary cap for 2021 could be dramatically impacted if the NFL loses a significant amount of revenue this coming season from canceled games or other effects from the pandemic. The CBA says canceled games if one or more weeks of any NFL season are canceled or all revenue for any league year substantially decreases, in either case due to a terrorist or military action, natural disaster, or similar event, the parties shall engage in good faith negotiations to adjust the provisions of this agreement with respect to the projection of AR and the salary cap for the following year so that AR for the following year is projected in a fair manner consistent with the change revenue projection caused by such action. And, the first thing, obviously, this is going to affect is the players now will, what is thought to be a normal salary go down if the salary cap goes down. Like, say, Yannick Ngakoue's market value, just to name a player off the top of my head right now, is worth $20 million. Will he be worth $15 million if the salary cap is significantly lower? I would think that's the case. I also think that teams would look to shed themselves of salary that doesn't match up with that market when they were projecting the market to go up, if they were able to do so. This is the next thing I want to pull up. Well, the loss in national revenue could be smaller. Fitzgerald thinks there's a possibility for the cap to drop anywhere from $40 to $85 million from the projected 2021 number of $215 million. Now, that sounds a bit far-fetched to me. You never know. But according to him, there could be a significant decrease in the cap. Based on how things stand right now, Fitzgerald calculates that would put anywhere from 14 to 28 teams over the salary cap. If the owners believe there will be a significant cap drop next year, Fitzgerald adds, that could lead to widespread veteran cuts this year as teams work to get under the cap, unless the NFL and the NFL Players Association can negotiate a way to push the hit into further seasons. And maybe that's what they would do. Maybe they would spread it out. So maybe it would be a flat cap over a 5-year period rather than it, going up every year by 5 or 6%, which is the league average year over year. If that were the case, maybe the league could look into doing something like that. but then the players' salaries would not go up for 5 years, but at least they wouldn't take that initial hit. So these are some things to think about regarding the cap. In terms of where the Giants currently sit, according to Sportrack, and like I said, there's been about a $6 million revision in what was the initial anticipated salary cap. In addition to that, the Giants backloaded a lot of contracts that we initially thought they weren't going to do. Now, the bright side of this is what I will say, 2 years down the line, in 2022, the Giants should have a ton of cap space unless they go out there and splurge this year because they were short-term deals. So they're still set up very well for the foreseeable future, but it doesn't give them a lot of wiggle room. If you look all the way to the right, the Giants are 20th in projected cap space as of now, with just over $46 million. They have $162 million committed to the cap, and we're going to jump into all the players on the roster right now. But if you look right here, and let me drag this over a bit for you guys. If you look right here at the bottom, it is $46.132 million as of now, and this does not include draft expenses. If you look here, nothing about draft expenses. It does not include rookies on this year because none of them have signed their contracts. We're going to go over the cap space, but that's going to count towards probably $15 million off next year's cap because, just for example, Daniel Jones last year, who was an early first-round pick, which is the cost that you have when you're picking early in the draft, those players get paid more. Just for example, this year made $6 million, I believe it was, which would translate to Andrew Thomas in year 2, would make about $6.5 million. Xavier McKinney would probably make a contract comparable to that of DeAndre Baker. I think Baker is going to make about $2 million this year or $2.5 million on his contract. So right there, that's another $9-10 million added to this cap. That also does not include the rookies that you're going to be bringing in. Now, of course, if the year were to get canceled, there may or may not be a draft. But a lot of this money, it will not be here when you factor in DeAndre Baker, when you factor in Xavier McKinney and all the rookies that we have signed, and we don't even know their contracts yet for year 2. In addition to that, the draft picks for the following season. So that has to be taken into account. In terms of some revisions that the New York Giants can make off next year's cap, well, yeah, there's a few. If you go all the way up to the top, and we're going to scroll over here for you guys, Nate Solder's the obvious big revision. No, Solder's due to make $20.5 million. He carries a $6.5 million dead cap hit, meaning if you were to cut him, that's going to save you $14 million right off the bat, and I think this is a given. I think this is going to happen. That $14 million will then be added to the projected 46, which would give you a little over $60 million right out of the gate. James Bradbury obviously not being cut. Kevin Zeitler is another option. Now, the only way this happens, in my opinion, because Kevin Zeitler is he's our best offensive lineman right now, he would have to either regress or they'd have to have a lot of faith in Shane Lemieux, who they'd be paying nothing. They'd be paying him like $700,000 to do the same job that they'd be paying Kevin Zeitler $14.5 million to do. But if they were to cut Kevin Zeitler or trade Kevin Zeitler, it would save you an additional $12 million on that cap, which would bump you up to $72 million. In terms of other players, Tate is a possibility I've talked about in the past as well. It all depends on their receiving core. If they think they're going to be drafting a receiver, is Sterling Shepard going to remain healthy to play the slot? He's a $5 million hit on an $11 million salary. I think he's definitely a possibility to be cut next year as well. That would save you an additional $6 million, especially if the salary cap were to take a hit. And suddenly, now you're at $78 million if you were to cut those 3 players. Now, do I think they'll cut all 3? I don't know. Zeitler, to me, is still a big question mark because you need a reliable player there at the guard position. The players after that, you're not cutting Blake Martinez. He's a near even to his salary. Saquon Barkley, obviously not cutting. Sterling Shepard not cutting. Daniel Jones not cutting. Obviously you just signed Jabril Peppers and Evan Ingram. That also needs to be taken into account. The last time we took a look at the salary, those 2 players were not signed either to their rookie extensions on $6.7 and $6 million. Dexter Lawrence, you're not cutting. Maybe you could cut Toyolo. Maybe you could free up an additional $5-6 million with small cuts down the roster, which bumps you up to maybe about $77 to $80 million. But then that's before taking into account whether or not you're going to extend Leonard Williams, taking into account the draft picks for the following year, and taking into account the rookie contracts from this year that aren't even factored in on this draft chart. So the Giants, after all is said and done, I see them having maybe about what this chart says after cuts, $45-46 million after you factor in the rookie contracts and things like that. And that is when the Giants will have to decide whether or not they should extend players like Saquon Barkley on his 3rd year, which a lot of teams have decided to do. If you were to do that, that would be about a $9 or $10 million raise on his salary. So the Giants next year, especially with the possibility of the salary cap either going down or remaining the same, not having a dramatic increase, probably aren't going to have a lot of cap to spend. Now, of course, all the teams are going to have to go through that if that's the case. But the Giants right now with the 20th most cap space in the sport, don't look for them to be big spenders next year. Maybe one big piece, but I don't think they're going to go out and splurge, and I think that's the right way to go about things. I would like to extend Saquon Barkley if it makes sense and if he stays healthy this year. That will, of course, be a storyline throughout the season. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But the New York Giants, maybe $45 to $50 million they should have to spend. At least that's the way it looks right now after the cuts they will make and the players they'll bring in on rookie contracts. Now, of course, you could always finagle things, backload things. And the biggest guys that they could cut, of course, Nate Solder, which I said is a given, Golden Tate, and Kevin Zeitler. If you were to cut all three, that is about $31 million in savings off of the initial 46, which bumps you up to about the 77 or 76, and then the other small cuts get you to 80 before all the other expenses that you have to take into account. But expect about $40 to $45 million for the Giants to be able to play with next year, and then they will have to decide who they want to extend and who they want to potentially bring in. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.